If you think big budgets and A-list stars guarantee a film's place in movie history, think again. Hollywood loves to bet hundreds of millions on can't-miss blockbusters, only to watch them fade faster than yesterday's memes. Seriously, how does a movie with more hype than sense just evaporate from the world's memory? Which mega-productions manage to vanish without a trace, barely leaving behind a meme or a midnight rerun? Stay tuned, some of these forgotten flops will blow your mind for all the wrong reasons. Jupiter Ascending 2015. Let's talk about cinematic ambition run amok. Jupiter Ascending had the Wachowskis at the helm, a production budget north of $175 million, and the kind of special effects that scream, "Look at all this money." Mila Kunis starred as a Chicago janitor who turns out to be intergalactic royalty, while Channing Tatum was a genetically engineered soldier who looked suspiciously like a dog auditioning for a perfume commercial. Eddie Redmayne, fresh off an Oscar, whispered every line like he was trying to summon a ghost. The setup was bonkers in all the right ways, promising a wild ride through space politics and CGI explosions. But what did audiences get? A 2-hour fever dream with plot holes so big you could pilot a star cruiser through them. The dialogue was so wooden it could have started a lumberyard. Critics pounced, audiences shrugged, and the film limped to a worldwide gross that didn't even cover its marketing. For a moment, everyone talked about how weird it was. Then, nothing. No cult following, no meme resurgence, not even a pity watch on streaming. Jupiter Ascending became the ultimate, "Wait, did that really happen?" film. If you can find anyone who still remembers the plot without looking it up, buy them a coffee. They've achieved something even the Wachowskis couldn't, making Jupiter Ascending memorable. Second, BenHur 2016. Remaking a stone-cold Hollywood legend takes guts, or maybe just a severe case of studio amnesia. The 2016 version of BenHur dropped $100 million on what was supposed to be an epic reimagining of the 1959 classic. Instead, it became a masterclass in how to make a $100 million movie disappear. Jack Huston replaced Charlton Heston in the title role, and Morgan Freeman sported dreadlocks so distracting they practically demanded their own spin-off. The film ticked every box for a studio blockbuster. Sweeping battles, high-speed chariot races, and CGI so glossy you could see your own disappointment reflected in it. But the magic wasn't just missing. It was nowhere to be found. Audiences barely flinched, critics shrugged, and everyone moved on. Even people who saw it in theaters have trouble recalling a single standout scene. BenHur didn't just flop, it evaporated. No nostalgia, no cult status, no midnight screenings, just a giant, expensive oops. It's almost impressive how fast this film slipped through Hollywood's fingers, as if the universe itself was trying to spare us from remembering. The next time a studio decides to remake a classic, maybe they'll remember BenHur. Actually, let's be honest, they probably won't. The Lone Ranger 2013. Picture this. Disney bets $225 million on a reboot of an old radio western, throws Johnny Depp into the mix as a face-painted Tonto, and expects audiences to stampede the box office. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as it turns out. The Lone Ranger arrived riding a hype train powered by the same team behind Pirates of the Caribbean, promising wild stunts and big laughs. Instead, the movie delivered 2.5 hours of tonal confusion, with Armie Hammer's bland Lone Ranger upstaged by Depp's bizarre antics in almost every scene. Add a script that ricochets between slapstick and surprisingly violent set pieces, and you've got a recipe for audience whiplash. Critics called it a disaster. Fans didn't even bother. The film's only real achievement was becoming a cautionary tale for why some relics should stay in the past. Despite its massive budget and star power, The Lone Ranger was trampled underfoot by public indifference. It didn't just flop, it vaporized. Even Johnny Depp completists skip it, and Disney pretends it never happened. If you ever need proof that more money doesn't always mean more movie, look no further. The Lone Ranger is the kind of blockbuster everyone instantly forgot, and nobody is riding to its rescue. Transcendence 2014. Imagine if Christopher Nolan made a sci-fi thriller about artificial intelligence, except he didn't, and his longtime cinematographer Wally Pfister did. That was Transcendence, a $100 million cerebral gamble starring Johnny Depp as a scientist who uploads his mind to the internet. The film boasted a cast loaded with Oscar winners and even had Nolan's executive producer stamp of approval. What could go wrong? Apparently, almost everything. Instead of thought-provoking, the script was muddled and the pacing glacial. Johnny Depp spent most of the movie as a giant computer face, and not even Morgan Freeman or Rebecca Hall could inject any life. Critics panned it as a Nolan knockoff without the thrills. Audiences nodded off or just never showed up. Despite all the buzz before its release, Transcendence didn't spark a single debate or midnight screening. It wasn't bad enough to be camp, and not good enough to be remembered. It simply faded out of the cultural consciousness, another visionary flop lost to the endless scroll of forgotten streaming titles. When was the last time you even heard someone mention Transcendence? Exactly. Tomorrowland 2015. Disney had every reason to believe Tomorrowland would become their next big franchise. Brad Bird directing, George Clooney headlining, and a secretive sci-fi plot spun from one of the most famous theme park attractions. $190 million in years of hype later, Tomorrowland premiered, and just as quickly vanished from the movie world's radar. The problem? Nobody could quite figure out what it was supposed to be. Optimistic science fiction adventure? Climate change? PSA? Middle school pep talk? The movie threw everything at the wall. Visions of utopia, action sequences, heavy-handed speeches, and hoped something would stick. Critics and audiences both left the theater feeling bewildered, not inspired. Box office numbers fell flat, merchandise didn't move, and Disney quietly swept Tomorrowland under the rug. Even the theme parks didn't bother with a big push. It became the ultimate example of a movie with all the right ingredients and none of the flavor. If you've ever wondered how a $190 million blockbuster could just disappear, look no further. Tomorrowland is a monument to good intentions, high hopes, and the power of collective amnesia. The Huntsman Winters War, 2016. Universal must have thought they were sitting on gold dust after Snow White, and the Huntsman pulled in nearly $400 million. But when Kristen Stewart bailed, the studio decided to turn a so-so side character into the main event with The Huntsman, Winters War. What could possibly go wrong with Chris Hemsworth swinging an axe and Emily Blunt as an ice queen? Well, just about everything. Instead of building on what worked, the film became a Frankenstein's monster of prequel, sequel, and spin-off, all wrapped into one confused package. It tried to fill the Snow White void with not one, but two Oscar-winning actresses, Emily Blunt and Jessica Chastain, each stuck in a fantasy movie that felt like it was making up the rules as it went. The story, thin as tissue paper, was sandwiched between CGI set pieces and endless exposition about love, betrayal, and magic mirror nonsense. Critics rolled their eyes, audiences stayed home, and Universal was left nursing a $70 million loss. By the time the closing credits rolled, you'd be forgiven for forgetting what you just watched. The Huntsman. Winters War was the movie equivalent of Snow in April, an oddity that vanishes almost as soon as it appears. No cult following, no sequels, not even ironic reappraisal. It's as if the film melted right out of our collective memory, and nobody's asking to bring it back. The BFG 2016. You'd think Steven Spielberg adapting Roald Dahl would be an automatic ticket to box office glory and childhood nostalgia. The BFG, with its $140 million budget and state-of-the-art motion capture, looked like it was destined for family classic status. Instead, it turned out to be the cinematic equivalent of lukewarm milk before bed, comforting for a minute, but instantly forgettable. Mark Rylance transformed into the big friendly giant with digital wizardry, but the film's tone felt so safe, so determined not to scare or challenge anyone that even kids seemed to lose interest halfway through. The adventure limped along in a haze of gentle British whimsy, packed with dazzling effects and not much else. Critics found it nice, but nobody called it necessary. Disney and Spielberg barely recouped their investment, and the BFG faded from theaters and from family living rooms almost overnight. You'd be hard-pressed to find even die-hard Spielberg fans who count this among his essential films. If you ask a roomful of people to name their favorite doll adaptation, don't expect the BFG to come up. It's proof that sometimes the bigger the friendly giant, the quieter the impact. Mortal Engines 2018. When Peter Jackson's name is on a project, expectations skyrocket. That's why Mortal Engines, a $150 million spectacle about roaming cities devouring each other Mad Max style, should have been a cultural juggernaut. Instead, it became a masterclass in how not to launch a franchise. The premise: cities on wheels fighting in a post-apocalyptic future. The reality: a cluttered, flavorless young adult adventure where the VFX were the only thing moving fast. With Christian Rivers in the director's chair, Mortal Engines was supposed to be the next Hunger Games. Instead, it had cardboard characters, a plot that recycled every YA trope, and an emotional core thinner than the London fog. Audiences barely noticed, critics barely cared, and Universal's dreams of sequels evaporated in a single opening weekend. Even die-hard sci-fi fans barely mention it today. Mortal Engines didn't crash and burn with drama, it just sort of stalled and then vanished. By the next summer, nobody remembered the cities, the heroes, or even the giant rolling London. If there's a Hall of Fame for instantly forgotten movies, this one deserves a golden ticket. Just don't expect anyone to show up for the ceremony. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, 2017. Hollywood loves an origin story, but Guy Ritchie's King Arthur. Legend of the Sword proved that even legendary tales can wear out their welcome. With a $175 million budget, a swaggering Charlie Hunnam, and Jude Law chewing scenery as the villain, this movie was supposed to be the gritty, modern Arthurian reboot nobody asked for. Spoiler alert, nobody showed up to watch it. The film's tone was classic Ritchie, snappy edits, Cockney banter, and more montages than you can count. But none of it added up to anything memorable. King Arthur tried to launch a cinematic universe, teased sequels, and even stuffed in fantasy beasts for good measure. Instead, it tripped over its own sword with clumsy storytelling and a script that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a crime caper or a medieval epic. Critics were unimpressed, audiences even less so. King Arthur barely made a dent at the box office, and any plans for a series were quietly buried. Today, it lives on as a footnote in both Ritchie's filmography and big-budget misfires. The Sword in the Stone might be eternal, but this movie's memory lasted about as long as a weekend matinee. Downsizing 2017. Shrink down all your expectations, and you still might be disappointed. Alexander Payne's Downsizing arrived with the kind of Oscar buzz that usually spells instant classic. Matt Damon plays an everyman who literally gets shrunk to 5 inches tall to save money and the planet, a quirky premise with the promise of satire, social commentary, and big laughs. Instead, what audiences got was an identity crisis in movie form. What started as a clever concept quickly turned into a weird blend of slapstick, social drama, and preachy environmental messaging. Kristen Wiig vanished after the first act, leaving Damon to wander through a shrunken world that felt oddly empty. Critics called it a muddle, audiences agreed, and award season ignored it completely. The film's tone shifts faster than Damon's height, never settling on what it wants to be. For a film that literally set out to make a big impact by going small, Downsizing couldn't have vanished from memory any faster. There's no cult following, no memes, and not even a resurgence on streaming. It's the rare blockbuster that somehow feels both massive and minuscule at the same time, proof that size in Hollywood really doesn't matter if you don't know what to do with it. 47 Ronin 2013. Here's a Hollywood lesson. Even if you give Keanu Reeves a sword, a massive effects budget, and a legendary Japanese tale, you can still wind up with a movie nobody remembers. 47. Ronin tried to turn a centuries-old samurai story into an action fantasy blockbuster. But the only thing legendary about it was how fast audiences forgot it even happened. Universal poured $175 million into dragons, witches, and CGI monsters, hoping to lure both Eastern and Western audiences. The result was a strange, muddled mashup of mythology and Hollywood spectacle, with Reeves dropped awkwardly into the middle. Japanese critics were baffled, American viewers were confused, and the box office cratered on both continents. For all its visual fireworks, 47 Ronin lacked the story, the tension, and the emotional hook that could have made it a global hit. The studio lost a fortune, and Keanu moved on as if the whole thing was a fever dream. Today, the film is less a punchline and more a head-scratcher. Did that really happen, or was it just an elaborate illusion? Either way, 47 Ronin vanished faster than a ninja in a fog bank. Chaos Walking 2021. You'd think putting together Spider-Man and Rey from Star Wars would be a guaranteed win. But Chaos Walking, starring Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley, spent years stuck in production limbo, then finally landed with all the force of a dropped phone in a crowded theater. No one noticed. The premise was intriguing, a planet where everyone's thoughts are visible, but the execution was textbook young adult bland. Despite a $125 million budget, multiple reshoots, and a cast stacked with rising stars, the movie stumbled from the start. Critics called it generic, fans yawned, and Lionsgate's dreams of a new franchise were dashed before opening weekend was even over. Even hardcore fans of the source novels barely mention it, and most casual moviegoers would struggle to recall if they saw it or just watched the trailer. The saddest part? Chaos Walking didn't crash and burn spectacularly, it just faded away. No midnight screenings, no so bad it's good nostalgia, just silence. It's now a textbook example of how even the hottest properties can go cold fast when Hollywood forgets to bring something new to the table. The Great Wall, 2016. If you blinked in 2016, you might have missed Matt Damon saving China from lizard monsters atop the Great Wall itself, a real movie, not a fever dream. The Great Wall was a bold attempt at a China-Hollywood crossover, loaded with spectacle, legendary director Zhang Yimou, and a $150 million budget. Matt Damon, dressed as a medieval mercenary, was supposed to help bridge cultures and bring in global audiences. What actually happened was a cultural mishmash that satisfied nobody. Chinese audiences shrugged at the Western leads. Western viewers scratched their heads at the monsters and folklore. The story lurched from set piece to set piece without ever finding a heartbeat, and critics on both sides of the Pacific rolled their eyes. The result? A movie so forgettable it became more famous as a punchline about white saviors than as a fantasy epic. The Great Wall came and went so quickly that even streaming services seemed to have misplaced it. Damon's hairpiece lasted longer in the public memory than the film itself. Hollywood and Beijing both moved on, pretending this historic partnership was just a rumor. If you remember The Great Wall, congratulations. You're one of the very few. The Greyman, 2022. You know a movie's in trouble when it's Netflix's most expensive project ever, and 3 weeks later, it's already faded into the endless scroll. The Greyman came out swinging with Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, and the Russo brothers behind the camera, on paper, a can't-miss action spectacle that should have set the internet on fire. Instead, what audiences got was a barrage of generic fight scenes, globe-hopping action, and a plot so forgettable you'd need a notepad just to remember who's chasing whom. It broke streaming records in its first few days, and then nothing. No buzz, no quotable lines, no water cooler debates, just a vague memory of something loud and expensive. Even Netflix, never shy about hyping its hits, seemed eager to move on. The Greyman is already shorthand for blockbuster emptiness, all the budget, all the stars, none of the staying power. In a world drowning in content, this was supposed to stand out. Instead, it's a perfect example of how quickly even the biggest movie of the year can vanish without a ripple. So there you have it, 15 movies that cost mountains of cash and disappeared like they were never even here. If Hollywood can forget its own biggest bets this quickly, what chance do the rest of us have remembering them? Did any of these surprise you, or do you have another favorite forgotten flop that deserves a second look? Drop your picks in the comments, hit subscribe for more untold movie stories, and share this with a friend who thinks blockbusters never die. Remember, in Hollywood, memory is short and hype is even shorter.